This is Bugatti's new 8.3 litre V16 engine that's due to go into the successor to the Chiron. Now this is a naturally aspirated motor that revs to 9,000 RPM and makes 1,000 brake horsepower all on its own. But the son of Chiron is also going to be a plug-in hybrid. So once this thing has all the electrical bits bolted to it, the entire unit will make 1,800 brake horsepower. It's also got 4 4-branch manifolds, which makes me irrationally happy. That is pure engineering pornography right there. But there's one thing we all want to know, and that's what it sounds like. So I'm going to shut up and let you hear it. Okay then guys, you ready? Let's send it. You're not really supposed to do this, but come with me. That's absolutely insane. I'm sort of struggling to process what that sounds like. Obviously it sounds like a multi-cylinder engine, but if you think about something like a V12, that's like almost like a dentist drill. It's really up here. This is a V16 and it's almost got 2 notes going at the same time, so it's quite bassy. When you open that door, you feel it in your chest. It's like, whoa. And my favourite engine ever is a V8. I'm not too keen on V12s because I think they're a bit too toppy. This is like a blend of both of them. Sort of that offset V8 thlub, but then got F1 vibes. That is a proper sounding motor. Just as an aside, let's do a little comparison because these are the songs of our people. Let me know in the comments which is your favourite. But there are a lot of special things about this engine. For a start, it's not just 2 straight 8s sandwiched together, or indeed 2 V8s nose to tail. And the other thing is, it is absolutely massive. It's 39.3 inches long, and once you bolt an 8-speed dual-clutch transmission to the back of it, it's nearer 79. That's absolutely huge, even compared to something like the Chiron's quad-turbo W16. Now the other thing with this is it's going to be a plug-in hybrid, so it's going to have a battery pack that drives 3 electric motors. There's 2 at the front, 1 for each of the front wheels and 1 on the rear axle, and together they should produce about 1,800 brake horsepower and give you about 37 miles of electric-only range, which is great for sneaking. According to things I've thought about, because I can do clever maths, that should give you 0 to 62 miles an hour in under 2 seconds, about 277 miles an hour top speed, and 0 to 186 miles an hour in less than 10 seconds, which is absolutely incredible speed. All the while sounding like this. Yep, I'm not going to get bored of doing that.
But forget the rest of the drivetrain just for a second, because that engine is what we're interested in here. And here is the home of famous engine builder Cosworth in Northamptonshire in the UK. If you've never heard of them, you've definitely heard them. They're responsible for the V12s in the GMA T50 and Aston Martin Valkyrie. And prior to that they made their name with fast Fords and dominating F1 from the late 60s through to the early 1980s with their DFV V8. They've made this thing from scratch, and it has to be the absolute best of the best. If you want to know exactly what's been going on, it's also good to ask the people involved, so here's someone I found wandering around the workshop. Cosworth MD Bruce Wood.
There's 3 bits to Cosworth. There's Cosworth Propulsion, which is this piece here based in Northampton, and then there's Cosworth Electronics and there's Cosworth Delta. And the bit that people traditionally think of as Cosworth is this bit, which is the internal combustion engines. And then at Cambridge we have Cosworth Electronics, which is control systems and data logging. And then at Silverstone we have Cosworth Delta, which is battery systems, battery management, and vehicle integration systems. So this bit is the bit that people traditionally think of as Cosworth. This is where the engines come out of. And I guess we consider ourselves very much It always upset me in previous years when people would say, oh, the engine tuner's Cosworth. Nothing could be further from the truth. What we do is generate from a complete blank screen, blank sheet of paper, powertrains for some of the greatest hypercars in the world, and also for aerospace. And it was only really when the Red Bull came knocking on our door with what was then the Project Nebula and turned into the Aston Martin Valkyrie, that really that set the ball rolling for what is today's Cosworth, what is the modern era Cosworth. And it was that Valkyrie that was transitional for us in realizing that actually here was the perfect marketplace where we could take everything we had learned through motor racing, everything we had learned through high-performance road engines, everything we were at that time learning about in terms of combustion systems and emissions and drivability, and put it into one package which frankly could afford the Cosworth services. You know, we'd come from Formula One. It demands a big infrastructure. It's not cheap, and so suddenly here was this marketplace where we could coalesce everything we'd ever learned into this marvel of the hypercar engine, which was great for Cosworth as a business, but also great for the clients because it enabled them to come to one facility and get everything from under one roof. So we could start from a blank screen and deliver hot tested engines into their production lines.
Nobody needs a V16 realistically, right? So who calls who when it comes to a bespoke, high-end, sort of quite large production volume engine like the Bugatti one?
Yeah.
How does that come about? Who phones who?
So that came about, interesting, when I picked up the phone one day to a number I didn't recognise, and the voice at the other end said, "Hi, it's Mate Rimac." And my first thought was, yeah, right. but I didn't recognise the voice, so I said, well, I'll keep listening. And Mate, I guess, had obviously seen the success we'd had with the Valkyrie and seen the success we'd had with the Gordon Murray. And so he picked up the phone to us and said, I'm interested in something similar, but being Bugatti, I think Bugatti has a very famous statement, if it's comparable, it's not Bugatti. You know, they have to have a thing which is unique. So very quickly in the conversation, it became apparent that Mate wasn't looking for a V12. He was looking for something different. Now, initially, again, it wasn't a V16. Initially, it was always 16 cylinders, but initially it was to continue the W16. And again, from that first phone call, I think probably there was a period where Mate would call about once a week with some new sort of tidbit or some new sort of nuance of how it was going to work. And then I think I would email him back about once a week after I'd thought about it for a bit, and we'd got together as a team and we'd said, how might that work? And so we gradually sort of pushed and pulled this thing into shape. We were very clear that whilst the W configuration has been fantastic for the sort of VW group, it's served many purposes. It's not a nice architecture for a high-speed, normally aspirated engine. That's never what it was intended for. So we kind of said from the beginning, we're completely bought into 16 cylinders, but let's do a V16. Because again, Mate was very clear, he didn't want turbocharging. He wanted normally aspiration. That was very clear from the beginning. And that again comes back to the thing that you simply cannot beat the driving experience of a big, normally aspirated, high-revving engine. The throttle response is so instantaneous. The noise is so glorious because, you know, we're all familiar with exhaust noise, but with a turbocharger, you don't get the induction noise. The thing which has made such a big splash in the media around the T50, Gordon Murray's car, is the induction noise, because it's right over your head. You don't get that with turbochargers. So part of the thing about these sort of cars, these hypercars, like you say, nobody needs 16 cylinders, nobody needs 12 cylinders, truth be told, but they are glorious pieces of engineering. I know I'm bound to say this, but personally, the world is a better place for these things, because they're an opportunity for everybody to put their heart and soul into these things and make these magnificent pieces of engineering. And the 16 is just extraordinary. The butterfly doors, they're not because it's easy to get in and out of, they're theatre. The whole point about these kind of cars is they're magnificent things to own. They're magnificent things just for passers-by to look at. The reason the car shows are so popular now all of us love looking at these things. They're glorious. The sound they make is just fantastic.
So what's Bugatti's take on all this? We asked a man called Dario.
Bugatti decided to do a brand new engine and decided to call Cosworth to help realizing and industrializing and producing the engine. We called Cosworth for sure because, we know the extremely high level of competence, skills and know-how that Cosworth has, and with no doubt we decided to go direct to them for this reason. Keep in mind that the core brand promise is, if comparable, is no longer a Bugatti. Okay, so first, we need to find and to respect this inspiring rule. Okay, so we decided definitely to keep and maintain the history of the recent history of Bugatti and keep this 16 as cylinder counting number. Okay. Then we decided, so for example, okay, why 16? Okay, why a V and no more a W, for example? We evaluated different architectures since the beginning during the first early concept phases. V, odd V, cold V, W again. At the end, the most, effective, the most, for example, lightweight, simple, but that can also allow us to reach that high level of performance, definitely is the V16 90 degrees.
So it sounds like this Bugatti V16 is as much about being a conversation piece as it is engineering necessity, because you could make that sort of power out of something a lot less complicated. But with rich people, the answer to the question of why is quite often, why not?
Thing is, V16s are not common. 1930s racing cars had a few, with Auto Union, Maserati and Alfa, as well as Cord, all featuring 16-cylinder stuff. Cadillac had the first production version in 1930 and homaged the hell out of it in 2003 with the Cadillac 16, and BMW had the Goldfish V16 in the 80s. The Rolls-Royce 100EX prototype had a V16, and there were a few home brews. But the later stuff all had one thing in common: they were concepts, not racers, not usual, and definitely not production.
In fact, the only other V16 production car that I can properly remember is probably the Cesetta Marauder. Now, that was a weird car that was made by ex-Lamborghini employees. It looked a bit like a Diablo, and it had two of the flat-plane Uraco V8s sort of melded together to give it a V16. But they did only ever make 13 of those cars. So if this successor to Chiron with its V16 actually makes the 250 unit production, it will make it the most production V16 ever.
That means that Cosworth has kind of found a rather nice niche for itself, and it's how new CEO Dr. Florian Camilga sees the company's future.
Where I grew up in the northern part of Italy, we were back in the days where I was 10 years old, we had to choose between a Lancia Delta Integrale and a Ford Sierra Cosworth, and that's where my understanding and my brand awareness of Cosworth comes from, and I've never lost track because I think it's one of the biggest brands in the partnering the automotive industry. Really, we will continue approaching the luxury environment in the automotive industry, the hypercar segment, the segment of the high net worth individual and the ultra high net worth individual customer. And I think the company has proven since about 8 years that it is the pinnacle of the automotive supply in that. My background is luxury and customer experience. And luxury is something we see the potential for the future for Cosworth, absolutely. you can compare it a little bit to the Swiss mechanical watch industry. I obviously moved then from Italy through Austria to Switzerland, and I've been in Switzerland since long. And if you want to have an accurate watch, you go and buy a whatever, Casio or Apple Watch, and that asks the question, what is luxury? And I think luxury is what you want, what you desire, what you don't necessarily need. And the same applies to hypercars. I think a customer who is appealed by such a car, for him it's not about the car only, it's about the experience to have this car, about the experience to hear the noise, about the experience to run the sound on a racetrack or on a alpine pass or wherever. I think it is about things money can't buy, really.
The space for these kind of, if you like, beautiful engineering works of art is definitely a position for Cosworth, and that is, when you think of it as engineering artworks, if you like, rather than A to B transport, then that is the place for Cosworth. I think, not saying we won't have some influence and some input, and we certainly have an interest in A to B transport, but the place that we excel, the place that is our home more than anywhere else, is in this this glorious engineering artworks. And in that space, like you say, the more outrageous, the better. Yeah.
So there you have it, a little idea of what's going on with Bugatti, Cosworth and their new V16 engine. It's an engineering masterpiece with a little bit of excess. Oh, and they're a pair of makers that might just have given me my new favourite engine sound.